let's have a look at the definition and then the tafseer of taqwa in the Qur'an. So the first thing is, what do we need to have taqwa of? Taqwa of what? We've seen why it's important to have taqwa, but taqwa of what? Well, Allah describes this for us in the Qur'an. The first thing is we need taqwa of Allah. For example, in 49:1, Allah says, وَاتَّقُوا. See, taqwa of Allah. And 49:1 is just one of these verses. There are several other references in the Quran which have stated here on the right hand side of this page. 33:37, 33:70, so on and so forth. There are many, many others. Okay, so taqwa of Allah. Then, taqwa on the day of accountability, the day of judgment. In 2:281, Allah says, وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا تُرْجَعُونَ فِيهِ إِلَى اللَّهِ. وَاتَّقُوا يَوْمًا, taqwa in the day. This is the day of accountability. Then, taqwa of the trial. Oh, and by the way, in terms of taqwa in the day of accountability, again, on the right-hand side, I've stated some other references that you should have a look at. Allah is repeating in the Quran what we need to have taqwa of. Taqwa of the trial. 8:25, Allah says, وَاتَّقُوا fitnatan. Fitnatan is the trial. So we need to have taqwa of the trial. What are the trials and tribulations? That's a separate Quran study session that we can do. I'll take a note. And taqwa of the fire. The fire, the punishment. In 3:131, Allah says, وَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ. وَاتَّقُوا النَّارَ. Nar is fire. And this is repeated in 2:25. So you see, these are the elements in which we need to have taqwa per the Quran. Now, if we look at the common translations of the Quran in English, there are two different translations you will normally find. Either taqwa in these things will be translated as fear, for example, fear Allah or fear the day, fear the fire, or be conscious of Allah, conscious of the day of accountability, etc. Now, from my perspective, I don't think that fear is an appropriate translation. Because consider this, Allah is not to be feared. Allah is to be conscious of, but not to be feared. Allah describes himself in the Quran being merciful, forgiving, bountiful. He's Rahman, Rahim. These are things towards which we would run, not fear. So I don't feel fear is the correct translation, even if the root word of the word taqwa could be fear. But in the case of the Quran, being conscious of these elements is more appropriate. Okay? Now, let's have a look at the tafseer of taqwa. So if we are to be conscious of these four things, how? What do we physically, practically have to do? Indeed, that's why we would want to understand the tafseer, the description, the explanation, wouldn't we? We would want to know how we can obtain taqwa. What do we practically have to do? So that's what we're going to study next. But before we do that, just a reminder, please do subscribe to our channel. We have lots of different study sessions on the channel in which we are looking deeply into the meaning of the Quran and the practical application of it. And please, while you're doing this, click on like on this video because that helps to spread the message. Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to have a look at the tafseer of taqwa in the Quran. Now, if we look at all the different places in which the word taqwa or its derivatives are used, you get to see the tafsir, the explanation. Look at this. These are the verses where Allah describes in detail, in practical terms, what taqwa is. Just look at this. Look at the blessing given to us by God in the Qur'an in terms of the extent to which He's explaining to us, describing to us what taqwa means. It's incredible, isn't it? Now, in terms of this study session, in order to help us to understand what all of this really means and how you would take the key messages from this, what I've done is split this into key segments. So, for example, the first segment or the first explanation of what taqwa is to accept and follow the revelations from Allah. Where are the revelations from Allah? The Qur'an. So Allah is saying, in order to have taqwa or obtain taqwa in those 4 elements that we looked at the beginning, the meaning of taqwa, we have to follow the revelations. So that means we have to make efforts to understand it. And that's what we're doing today, for example. We have to accept and follow the revelations from Allah. Now, there are lots of different verses here, and I've given you so many different references. In your time, you should go through some of these in order to see how they've used the word taqwa and how that's been explained. What I'm going to do is go through just one of these. For example, 6:155, Allah explains how to obtain taqwa, or to be a muttaqi. We have to follow the revelations from Allah. Here, Allah says, وَهَذَا كِتَابٌ أَنزَلْنَاهُ مُبَارَكٌ فَاتَّبِعُوهُ وَاتَّقُوا لَعَلَّكُمْ تُرْحَمُونَ. And this is a book. We have revealed it, a blessing. Allah is talking about the Qur'an here. So follow it. And have taqwa so that you may experience the mercy. Look at this. Look at how Allah is providing an explanation of taqwa. He's saying to have taqwa, you have to follow the book that has been revealed. And the outcome of it is that we will experience the mercy of God. So, can you see how there is a description here of taqwa? A tafseer. Following the book. Okay. So, accepting and following revelations from Allah. The other, or a second category, is to persevere in good deeds and justice and not to spread corruption. And look at all of these different verses where Allah is describing this. That taqwa is to persevere in good deeds and justice and to avoid the spreading of corruption. There are so many verses. What a blessing from God. Look at how many ways in which He's describing the meaning of the word taqwa for us in the Qur'an itself. So pick one or two of these and have a look. We're going to move on to the next one. The next category is to stay truthful and to fulfill covenants, to fulfill our promises. Being truthful and fulfilling our promises. Being truthful, like 9:119. Speaking rightly, 33:70. Providing truthful testimony, 5:107. Do not break covenants, 8:56. Keeping the bond with Allah. And then another category, stay within the bounds or limits set by Allah. Allah is using the word taqwa to describe the aspect of staying within the limits that have been set by Allah. And those bounds, those limits have been set by Allah in the Qur'an itself. This is part of the tafseer of taqwa. To have taqwa, we have to stay within the limits set by Allah. Next, avoiding the temptations of Satan. Look at how many verses Allah is describing that to have taqwa, to be a muttaqi. We have to avoid the temptations of Satan. Again, take a few of these, open up the Quran and take a look. And then the last category is to not associate anything or anyone with God or His commands. Shirk. Not doing shirk. Serving God alone. Turning only to Him. Do not invoke anyone besides Allah. All of these have been linked with the word taqwa. They describe taqwa. So if we pull these categories together, here we have a high-level tafseer of taqwa from the Quran. Number 1, accept and follow the revelations from Allah. Number 2, persevere in good deeds and justice and do not spread corruption. Number 3, stay truthful and fulfill covenants, promises. Number 4, stay within the bounds and limits set by Allah, which exists in the Quran. Number 5, avoid the temptations of Satan. And number 6, not to associate anything or anyone with God or His commands, serving Him alone. This is just a summary of this detailed tafseer of taqwa in the Quran itself. Now tell me whether you feel we still need to look outside of the Quran to obtain tafseer of taqwa. Do you feel that Allah has left anything out in describing taqwa? Let me know in the comments. Let me know whether you feel that this description truly is ahsana tafseer, the best tafseer, the complete tafseer. I'm really curious to get your view. Because most people, it has to be said, they're not aware that the Quran provides such tafseer. They're blindly accepting that to obtain tafseer, you have to look and read and listen to sources outside of the Quran. Whereas Allah says that Quran is ahsana tafseer.